Morning again. Welcome to Queensland Garden Expo live streaming to you via Facebook and YouTube. And we're very happy today. We've had Costa on earlier this morning, taking us for a tour of the community gardens. But we're now about to get underway with the Q&A session with the one, the only Jerry Coleby-Williams, who's joining us across. So I'll flick you over to Jerry. Everyone say good day to Jerry. We are going to be taking questions throughout the course of the morning. So if you do have any questions, pop them in the chat and we'll get through as many as possible. Jerry is keen to answer as many questions as he possibly can through here today. Aren't you, Jerry?
Oh, yeah, I'm raring to go. And I do have to apologise. I'm actually here in camouflage. Most people will only just about recognise me now. I've got my hat on, but it's definitely still Jerry.
Definitely still Jerry. Well, I'm going to sit in the background through here because we do have a couple of questions that have come in previously as well. But as mentioned, get in early, pop them in the chat stream there, and we can fire them up and get through as many as possible, because Queensland Garden Expo is normally all about answering those garden questions from all these wonderful gardeners. And I've got one through here. First one is from Kim. And Kim asks, how close can I plant my fruit trees in my orchard? So they'll get underway, Jerry. A bit of a
okay. Right. Well, it's an interesting question, because you haven't helped me there, because really it depends on whether you're growing fruit trees which are growing on dwarfing rootstock, and so they'll be relatively small and compact, or if you're just planting fruit trees which could grow into really large trees. So I guess there's two answers for this one. If the fruit trees are on dwarfing rootstock, you need to plant them at about 3 meters apart. And if they're just allowed to grow naturally, then you need to leave at least 5 meters in between the trees. Now, if they're going to grow into large trees, the next thing that you need to think about is, how high do you really want these to grow? If you imagine a mango tree just being allowed to do its own thing, it's not going to be very many years before it's too tall for you to safely pick fruit from that tree. So I encourage people to think of what would be a safe picking height. Personally, for me, the safe picking height is going up a step ladder, not right to the top step, just one below. And what I feel I can safely pick and gather, that's a safe picking height for me. And that will vary according to certain trees. A mango is a nice, easy fruit to pick. But in my garden, I've got jackfruit. And a jackfruit is about the size of a baby. And so if you're at the top of a step ladder and you've got to reach out to pick the fruit and bring it back, you've got to make sure that that tree is not too big. So a safe picking height is important. And also think about the maintenance that you've got to do. You may have a ground cover or a grass or something growing underneath those fruit trees, and you may wish to cut them. Now, if you're cutting those with something like a ride-on mower, and some orchardists will use a ride-on mower to do this, you don't want the trees to be too far apart. So it's an inconvenient width to take your ride-on mower through. You may want to do one or just 2 passes with a ride-on mower. So think about how far apart you plant them in terms of the rows, as well as the distance between the fruit trees in those rows, and whether those fruit trees are going to be growing on dwarfing rootstock or not. If they're dwarf, 3 meters is okay. If they're not, then I'd allow 5 meters, possibly 6. And don't forget, you've got to have a safe picking height to make that orchard worth all that effort.
There we go. So some things for him to think about is planning that spacing. I've got another question here, Jerry. Where it's from Sophie, and Sophie writes, my father recently had a soil test done in the soil in his veggie garden, and it came back with high levels of phosphorus. Is this detrimental to the veggies, and what can be done to fix it?
Okay, well, yes. I mean, when you have your soil tested, and this can be quite an expensive process, so it's not something that you would do just every day or at a whim. I've had soil testing done here, and it costs around about $750 to have various things tested in the soil. And I justified that expense because I really wanted to set up my garden for a long period of time. I've been gardening here for 17 years now. So that has paid off. It told me what was deficient and what I had too much of. And it was quite easy to work a way through that so that I had fertile soil with neither excesses or deficiencies. So if the soil test has been produced, I would hope you'd have other results, not just phosphorus. For example, the pH of your soil is really important. And it's quite simple and easy for anybody to test. It's about $20 to get a pH test kit. And it explains inside how to take the samples, how to work out what the results are and what to do next, how to condition your soil to get the right pH. And the reason I mention this is because if you go for what I call the gardener's holy grail, which is a soil pH test result of between 6.5, slightly acid, and 7, which is neither acid nor alkaline, just in that little narrow band, the majority of plant nutrients that will be present in the soil, or we may add as fertilizers or compost or manures, then those compounds become available for plants to use. And it's a simple balancing act with chemistry in the soil. The more acid or the more alkaline the soil becomes can have impacts on the availability of nutrients. Some things can be chemically unavailable to plants, even though they're there in the soil. And this brings us back to the result of having too much phosphorus in your soil. An excess of phosphorus is something which can affect the uptake of zinc, iron, and I think manganese, which is a trace element. But zinc and iron are pretty important for healthy plant growth. And so if you plant something in soil that has too much phosphorus, plants can often have strong root systems, which is what phosphorus can help them to do. And they may have strong cell walls, which is something which also phosphorus helps plants to achieve. But without being able to access the iron and the zinc in the soil, the plants will look really sick, they'll look really yellow, and that's a cause for concern. It's not going to help your plants thrive. There's not much you can do once there's too much phosphorus in soil. And so that's why it's really important when you apply fertilizers to soil, see what the manufacturer recommends, because different forms of phosphorus will be applied at different rates. And it's important to stay within those recommendations, because once it's in the soil, you have to wait quite a long time for it to either slowly percolate through the soil through rainfall or irrigation water, or for the plants to use it. And so look, there's a warning there for you that your plants will not look good and they will not survive well. So what can you do? If it's a planting mix, then you could try and dilute it with existing garden soil, mixing it in, working it up, and spreading that phosphorus through the topsoil. If it's pure topsoil that you've added to a potting mix, or you put it into a raised garden bed, then you really need to remove half of it and put in some fresh soil. Now, one thing that is in the back of my mind when I hear this is, how could you have soil that is too rich in phosphorus? Either you can apply too much fertilizer, in which case you've got to remember what I've just said about following the manufacturer's recommended rate and diluting that soil. But if you've bought that mix from a supplier to fill up a raised garden bed, probably the next time you do it, take a soil pH test kit and check the pH of that mix before you buy it. Because in many instances, elevated levels of phosphorus in planting mixes bought from suppliers arise from adding too much poultry manure to that planting mix. And adding the poultry manure can also raise the pH of the soil, making it quite alkaline. So when you're buying, test before you buy. And if you are going to buy something which is high pH and it's an artificial soil or artificial planting mix, it may well mean that that high pH also indicates too much phosphorus for plants. So in essence, when it comes to feeding a garden, do remember that while a little bit of phosphorus can be good, that a lot does not necessarily mean it will be wonderful. Check before you buy. If you can, dilute it with ordinary soil so you spread the phosphorus through the topsoil. And if not, well, you're just going to have to wait for nature to do its job and for that phosphorus to disperse through the soil. And if you need to adjust the pH, take a pH test and follow the instructions and do that. There's no quick answer for this problem.
Hopefully that helps Sophie get on top of that. I've got another question that's been emailed through for you, Jerry. And just a reminder for people to post their questions up now whilst they can through on the timeline, because whilst we've got Jerry live, you can get those answered live here this morning. But this one comes in from Marquita, and I've got a picture, so I'm going to try and show the picture in a minute too.
Okay.
So, and Marquita writes, "Hi Jerry, could you please tell me what's wrong with my avocado tree and how to help it? I was given the tree from a friend a few months ago. It was in a pot but thrived in the ground once it was put in, and new shoots appeared soon after. Suddenly its new shoots have died off and the leaves are yellowed. I fed it in the past with worm juice, diluted, and gave it some organic 5-in-1 fertilizer before it went downhill. It's in clay soil, but it was previously prepared with manure and lots of sugarcane mulch. How can I fix it? I've already lost one avocado to root rot and in another area further away, but this looks different on the other plant. Thank you." And here's the picture. I'm going to through the. There we go. Hopefully I can get the picture up looking wonderful. So picture can. There we go. Hopefully you can see the picture through here. So very sad.
Yes,
very sad looking avocado from Makita. So how can get that fixed?
Okay. Now this is another quite a complicated situation. Okay, so let's start with the basics. You're planting an avocado in clay soil, which is a challenge. In Eastern Australia, avocados can suffer from root decay planted in clay soil during periods of heavy rain. And if we cast our minds back to the rainfall that we had here in Queensland in February, my garden here, I had 660 millimeters of rain in 1 month, and my garden was saturated. Now, clay soil, if it doesn't drain well and it hasn't been improved or worked on, that can hold the water for a very long period of time. And waterlogged soils, particularly clay soils, only have to be waterlogged for about a day. And during that time, the feeder roots of plants can suffer from dieback, and it's that suffocation at the roots that's the reason why we try to improve drainage in soil. Now, if you're on clay soil, there are options. Firstly, you can grow an avocado on dwarfing rootstock in containers. So a pot which would be about, say, between 65 and 80 litres is enough to grow a dwarf avocado for the whole of its life. And so you don't deal with clay soil or the issues with drainage, which can cause problems in later life. If you do want to grow an ordinary avocado in clay soil, you really need to decompact that soil, digging it. Digging it to the depth of 2 spades deep is not too much to do when you're planting a long-lived fruit tree. Again, with my back garden, I have a very fine sandy soil over horrible cracking clay. And that interface between the sandy topsoil and the clay beneath it has got a hard iron pan. And that hard iron pan is almost like having a a plastic liner between the topsoil and the subsoil. And digging that soil 2 spades deep allowed me to break the hard iron pan so that the water could percolate through the column of soil from the topsoil into the subsoil. And that does really help. But the next thing you can do is to plant your avocado into a mound or into a raised bed. And that improves drainage, because it's all about the feeder roots. And the feeder roots for avocados are very susceptible. And avocado it's a rather fussy plant, like citrus. They like moisture, but they don't like too much of it. So the drainage has to be good. Planting into a mound between 30 and 50 centimeters high, will ensure that water, when it falls, will run away from the base of the tree, and it will keep moving. And that will help oxygen to penetrate around the feeder roots of the tree. Now, one thing which hasn't been mentioned here is that the tree that you planted has come out of a pot. It spent some time in a pot before it was planted. When you do plant something which has been accustomed to growing in a pot, even if it's come straight out of a nursery, you do need to check for spiraling roots. And these are the roots which will go around the outside of the pot. Spiraling roots have learned that habit to go around and around. They never go down into the soil. They don't anchor into the soil. And so these must be pruned off. And to do that, to find out all those spiraling roots, you need to get your fingers into the root ball, disturb the roots, shake out the soil, and have a look at that root system before you plant it. Spiraling roots will just continue going round in circles. They're not very good at feeding, and they're certainly no good at supporting a tree. So a little bit of root pruning before you plant into a mound in clay soil after adding plenty of compost. So that opens up the pores between the particles of clay. It allows water to come through. It allows oxygen through. And one final thing, you're growing an avocado. Now, an avocado will fruit on its own reasonably well, but if you have a pollen partner for that avocado, it'll do even better. Garden centres now have labels on all the different varieties of avocados that they sell. And if you look very carefully, it's in sort of the fine print, but at the back, it will say whether it's an A variety of avocado or a B variety of avocado. And to get a good compatible pollen partner for your avocados, you need an A and a B. So while you planted one avocado, that's good. Try and plant 2, an A and a B, and you'll find the results, the amount of fruit you get, even from a dwarf avocado, will almost double. And that's really worthwhile knowing. So thanks for that question, and good luck with your little avocado. They are fussy trees, but if you get the right spot, wow, they are brilliant.
Here we go. We've got, I'm going to bring the next questions up screen, and another reminder that if you do have any questions, pop them through. I see some coming along the way. So this is one that obviously was posted somewhere else. So it's from Cara. Possums eating all of my begonias. She's tried Hossoff, coffee grounds, blood and bone, clove oil to no avail. Can you tell her if quassia chips work?
Wow. Look, Cara, I feel your pain. Many moons ago, I used to manage Sydney Botanic Gardens, and we had the unfortunate location of being in the CBD, where all the people that were relocating possums put them in the gardens. So we had a massive population. They got extremely hungry in July and August. And one of the first things we tried was quassia chips, and they won't get between a possum and lunch. Possums are incredible. They're absolutely incredible. They will eat toxic plants with no problems. So quassia chips, which taste bitter, rather like aloe vera, it's not really going to stop a possum from eating them, because in my garden, they eat raw cassava leaves, and cassava is very toxic, and they have had no ill effects whatsoever. Blood and bone, again, it's something which will be nice for the plants. It's a fertilizer which will help the plants. It's not going to stop a possum from eating them. And of course, you've got to reapply after rain. So what can you do that really works with a possum? Well, the best thing you can do is to wrap the fruit in bags, or to enclose the fruit trees in netting. I have enclosed my jaboticaba. I have a soursop fruit tree as well. And I enclose the entire fruit trees so that the whole thing is covered in hail protection mesh. And that's perfect, because hail protection mesh excludes them completely. And I tie it in at the base. So I've got a couple of fruit trees which look like netted lollipops. They're quite bizarre, but totally protected from possums. And getting back to an earlier question, I was talking about pruning fruit trees to a safe picking height. When you do that, it also means that you can get on a stepladder and you can put this hail protection mesh over and around the fruit tree. So it's not just a safe picking height, it also makes maintenance and possum protection a lot easier. Now you can use shade cloth, as long as it's not deep shade cloth, no more than 50% proof. And you can use that as a winter protection for fruit trees. Or you can do something, and I'm very pleased to say my fruit protection bags here, this is a mesh which I just bought 50 of them, because you can put these around rather large fruit and allow them to develop, because my jackfruit is an absolute magnet for possums. And it's only when the fruit are small and really have a very soft skin that they're interested. So by tying this around, you just got these little ties that go around the fruit. The fruit will get plenty of air coming through. The fruit will get sunshine through, so the fruit development will occur within this bag. And when the jackfruit are getting close to filling it, well, I'm just going to untie them and I can reuse these again next year. There was one tip which I did for Gardening Australia, and that would have been about 18 months ago. Gardening Australia has got a good website and they have a search facility. And on that, I recommended using atomic chili spray as a deterrent. And this again was connected to my cassava, which the possums just love eating. And the discovery there was that all the chilies which I used to use were not strong enough to have any impact on the possums. And so by getting a really hot chili, Carolina Reaper is the hottest chili on earth. There's another one with a horrible name called Butjalokia, which is number 2 in the heat index of chilies. And this is really the sort of chili which would be used in pepper spray, in crowd control. And it does control possums. It really does work. So go to the website, Gardening Australia's website, look up my atomic chili spray. That'll give you a recipe, but remember, you've got to go to the hottest chilies for it to stand any chance of working on possums. And because it is washed off by rain, be prepared to reapply each time you've been out watering or you've had heavy rainfall. And good luck, you're in good company. Many people have this problem.
Okay, well, I've just got another question come through from Deborah. Laid fresh pine bark on the walkway. How do you stop the neighbours' cats from digging it up?
Oh, Deborah, I wish I had the perfect answer for you, because that's exactly what happens. I have mulch footpiles and the cats love doing it. One of the things that my grandfather did, which was to get cloudy ammonia, which is an old-fashioned cleaning agent, and he used to dribble a little bit into the bottom of a small jam jar, and he would bury that up to its neck near to where the cats go, because they come back to where they've been. It's all about territory. It's all about saying, this is my patch, and trying to discourage other cats from using their patch. So the idea is you put it down, bear it up to its neck. The cat comes along, and as usual, they check around the area. They have a little bit of a sniff around, just checking if there's any competing scents there, because they've got to be top cat. And they get a whiff of the ammonia. It gives them the shock of their life. And he reckoned it was a good way of keeping them from coming back. There are things like peppers, which you can put around, and some people will put chili powder around that area, again with the idea that the animal will go around and disturb it. They'll get chili in their nose, they'll have a reaction, they'll remember the place where it happened, and they'll move on. A bit like the atomic chili spray, you do need to reapply that after heavy rain, but that's really all you can do. There's not much else that you can do to keep cats away. So good luck. And good for you for using mulch on footpaths as well. It's a really great way of slowing down runoff and getting more rain to percolate into the soil. Now, I have a question here. And one question I got, this is through my Facebook page, was from Sharon. And Sharon asked the question, is it possible to make a useful fertilizer out of weeds? Well, yes, Sharon, you can. Weed tea is often one of the ways that this is made. The best types of weeds are the soft, leafy green weeds that you can get. So if you imagine something like docks and nettles, they have leafy leaves which rot down very, very quickly. Now, to make this, all you need is a large bucket, put some water in over the weeds, drown the weeds. If you've got a lid, put the lid over the top, but don't exclude the air. Allow air to percolate through, because as it breaks down, it will need aerobic bacteria to do the breakdown process. They're the most useful ones. And you can stir this mix once every couple of days, just to make sure that all the weeds get moved around and they break down evenly. And after about 3 to 4 weeks in winter, only 2 weeks in summer, because temperature will affect the rate at which decomposing will occur, then you've basically got a liquid soup, a nutritious soup. Use a watering can, take the rose off, because you don't want that to get blocked with any particles. And what I tend to do is I'll filter that water, that weed tea, from one bucket into another bucket, and I'll usually use a sieve laid inside with something like shade cloth, or you could use a Chuck's cleaner, and that will filter out any of the particles so you don't block the watering can, and then you can water it around. It's a dilute fertilizer, so if you're applying it to a hungry plant like citrus or bananas or cabbages, then you can just use it as it is. There's no need to dilute it. It's nothing like as strong as worm tea, but you can just apply that. And of course, the residue, that goes straight onto the compost heap, and it finishes off breaking down. It's a great way to do it. One of the best weeds that you can actually use are nettles. Nettles are pretty famous for soaking up nitrogen, and the presence of a large population of nettles in a garden is a good indication of nitrogen-rich soil. So if you do have them, you can crop them, use them as fertilizer, and it makes a really nice little system. My grandfather used to have a nettle patch near his allotment, and he never dug it up. He always used to use that as a quick source of leafy material to make weed tea. It's actually quite an old system. So good luck, put those weeds to use.
There we go, and we've got some more, lots of questions coming through now on the live chat.
Good.
I'll throw one up here from Shell, who's having problems with the rodents this year, recently covering low-growing plants with old lace curtains, and also used aviary mesh over raised garden beds. My compost bins are covered securely. Any suggestions?
Well, look, you're doing the sort of things that I do. there was a really big problem in Melbourne and also in Brisbane this autumn. I had rats and mice eating my eggplant, and I was supposed to be using them as props for filming, but they hollowed them right out. So again, I mentioned earlier about using fruit protection bags. This is what I used to save my eggplant from further damage. Net curtains are fine as long as it protects or prevents the rats from climbing up underneath, because they're pretty agile. They're not like possums. The thing about rats is that they will investigate and they will burrow. And sometimes if they get really hungry, they will nibble through coverings. My compost heap is covered with shade cloth to stop the leaves from being blown away, or to stop birds coming in and digging through and throwing stuff on the outside onto footpaths. But that doesn't work with rats. They just dig through. They just chew their way through, and that's what they've done with my compost heap. So chicken wire is your friend. If you have a compost heap which is open at the base, rats will burrow underneath. And with my kitchen scraps bin, what I did was I put them on timber sleepers so that there's a wood barrier that the rats can't burrow underneath and get into the base of my compost heap. And you can use chicken wire to put over the top, and that stops them from getting in the top. And that, plus your use of old net curtains, plus the use of these bags, are good ways of defeating rats. One other thing is, if you do have animals in the house or pets, don't leave feeding bowls outside at night, because dog food, cat food, that's the sort of thing which will really bring in possums and rats into your garden. And if you have poultry out in the garden, use the feeders that don't allow them to scatter seed around. It's generally overfeeding and leftover food in poultry runs, which are one of the biggest magnets for rats to come into gardens. And in the compost heap, don't put in things like bread or other scraps, things which will putresce, but they will also attract rats. They'll love an old crust of a crusty roll or a bit of bread. That'll bring them in. And if the compost heap is too dry, then you may find that they'll try and nest in there. So that's one of the reasons why you've got to be careful what you put in your compost heap, how you protect it at the bottom and at the top from rats. Okay, and good luck.
There we go. I've got a couple of avocado questions again. It's a avocado day. So the first one I'll throw up through here is from Gail, who's bought an avocado tree in northern New South Wales. I'm wondering if she can grow it in a large tub or put it in the ground and cut it back each year so it doesn't get huge.
Well, yes, Gail. If it's been grafted onto dwarfing rootstock, it can spend the whole of its life in a container that's about 60 to 80 litres in capacity. And that's a common practice. If it's not on dwarfing rootstock, yes, you can prune them. And that just means that you need to establish what would be a safe pruning height. Now, it varies for everybody, but for me, a safe pruning height is getting up to the top step on a ladder, so not right up on the top step, and what I feel I can reach out and pick. And so I prune the lateral growth of trees so they don't get too wide, and I take the top out when they've achieved what I believe is a safe pruning height. And you don't need to do a lot of pruning to an avocado, but you will have to stop it from constantly trying to grow up and getting too big. It's not too difficult, It'll only take you about 5 years for a young seedling to reach a safe pruning height. And as long as you remember to keep it to that height, they'll do really well, and they'll be very long-lived.
There we go. We'll mix it up with another question through here from Kerry. My blueberry bush, which is in a large pot, has recently flowered and has started to fruit, but has lost most of its leaves. pH is perfect. Good organic matter levels. Could it be fungal disease? Have sprayed with worm juice and seaweed solution. Can I save it?
Well, look, it could be that you have a fungal problem there. Yes, that is a possibility. But firstly, you're growing it in a pot. And blueberries are rather like avocados, that they do like moisture, but they don't like too much or too little. So I would start by checking that the drainage holes of the plant are working, so that water is draining out. One of the big problems that we have with potting mixes, which are made with bark, that as bark breaks down, it forms a bit of a sludge, and that sludge can gather at the bottom of the pots. And if it builds up over time, over about a year or 18 months, it can actually seal up the drainage holes. So water can build up, it can suffocate the roots, and then once the roots start to die, that's when fungal problems will start to develop in the root system, cause dieback. Shedding leaves, to me, is a warning that it may actually be in waterlogged or anaerobic conditions. So if you can, knock it out of the pot, check the root zone, see if the roots are looking young and white and fresh and healthy, or if they've gone dark and discolored and you haven't got any new growth on the tips. And that's your warning. But I suspect that by checking the drainage holes are functioning and making sure that they do work, if you can, use broken terracotta pots, crocks, and crocks with a curve, sit that curve over the drainage hole so that water can soak underneath and get through and drain out of the pots. That is a good protection against the sludge from bark-based potting mixes from blocking the holes. And I always use an old bamboo pole as well, so I have quite a few things in pots. And after I've had really heavy rain, I'll lift the pots up and put the bamboo pole underneath, rather like this, and you just poke it into the drainage hole and it'll open them up and they'll drain through properly. And with time, the leaves will reappear.
There we go. I've got a composting question now coming through. So we've got time for maybe a couple more before we let Jerry go. But this is from Kim. Hi, Jerry. Should you place a compost system in full sun or in the shade? I'm thinking of using pallets. Will that be okay?
Well, look, pallets are fine for making a compost heap, but going back to my replies about keeping rats out, you do have to do quite a lot of work if you don't want rats moving in and breeding. Pallets can allow a lot of oxygen in and water out. And certainly here in Queensland, the issue is infrequent rain. So you will have compost heaps which will dry out. They'll dry out around the edges quite quickly. So watering that compost to keep it evenly damp will be a regular issue. And that will be more of an issue if they're in the full sun. I recently did a consultation for a garden, and they had wonderful compost heaps, but they were all out in all-day sunshine. And the compost had stopped being produced because everything was dry. They weren't able to water it enough, keep it evenly damp enough for the composting to occur. So they had a perfect setup, but in the wrong location. So I just said, well, move it into the southern side of a fence where it's cool. That means rain and water that you add to the compost will last longer. And that's really what you need with compost heaps, consistent dampness to encourage the breaking down of organic matter. And one of the things I hate having to do is to dig compost heaps up to get stuff from the outside which is dried up and move it into the center where it's moist so you get even composting occurring. I really hate having to do that. So that may be something that you will have to do if you use pallets, because they are so porous and they allow so much air to move through. Best thing, put them somewhere cool, and don't be shy to water your compost, particularly around the edges during dry weather. Good luck.
There we go. And I've got another question coming through. So we've got from Sheila. Good morning, Jerry. I live in Glasshouse Mountains and would like advice on what to try in my small raised vegetable garden bed, which is in a quite shady position. What should I try? Radishes and potatoes are going well at present. Love you on Gardening Australia. There you go.
Oh. And what a lovely part of the world to be gardening in. Look, Sheila, I have a website which is cunningly disguised under www.jerrycoleby-williams.net, and a few weeks ago I published a blog, What to Sow Now in the Subtropics, and I think I had probably about 60 different things that are available to sow now. Radishes are one of my favorites, and in a shady position at the moment, you could get away with growing things like parsley and lettuce. They will enjoy those conditions. Endive also will do well. Radicchio, that doesn't mind a little bit of shade. In my garden, I grow garlic chives in quite a shady position, and they do extremely well there. In terms of growing things in the long term, do remember to practice crop rotation. Don't grow the same things in the same spot year after year after year. So potatoes, do them now, but give them a rest next year and grow something slightly different. You can get away with sweet potato when the weather warms up, because while they're in shade now, there'll be longer days as the weather warms up. And of course, the angle of the sun will change. So you might be able to swap from winter potatoes to spring and summer sweet potato. But have a look at that little blog that I've got, because there are 60 different things which you could be sowing now. And probably about half of those, so 30, would be suitable for partial shade. The main rule for growing vegetables is to try and give them 6 hours of sunshine in a day. And if you can provide that, then pretty much the sky's the limit in this part of the world.
There you go. Well, thank you very much for that, Jerry. I know there's a couple of other questions in through there, but we're probably going to be running pretty much to time. And I'm sure, Jerry, you won't mind getting there and answering some of the ones that we might not have covered off on via Facebook, on the chat through there as well. But it's been great doing a bit of Q&A here this morning. What's the rest of the day entail for you, Jerry, getting out in the garden, doing some...
Look, I've got some mustard to sow. This is my little variety of mustard. And I've got to sow some straw flowers, because I haven't grown straw flowers for so many years.
Yeah.
So, yeah, sowing today. Hopefully rain tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us for Q&A. As mentioned, those questions that didn't get answered, we'll try and get them done online, and we'll be back a little bit later. I'm actually talking about potting mixes come just after 1 o'clock. So people interested in potting mixes and what goes into them, we'll be playing around with that. But enjoy the rest of the day on what's a virtual Queensland Garden Expo today.
That's right. We've done virtually everything we can, haven't we, this year?
Exactly. Well, thanks a lot, Jerry. Thanks everyone that joined in.
Goodbye.